13th is directed by Sean S. Cunningham and stars Betsy Palmer and Kevin Bacon. A group of camp counselors trying to reopen a summer camp called Crystal Lake, which has a grim past, are stalked by a mysterious killer. As someone who loves horror movies and as someone who enjoys a lot of 80s horror, Friday the 13th has never been my cup of tea. That's not to say I did not enjoy a few of these movies. There are some movies that are guilty pleasures of mine. There are some that I do legitimately enjoy, like Jason Lives, which I think is so far my favorite of the Friday the 13th films. I think for the most part, the Friday the 13th movies have all been mostly mediocre or just downright terrible for me. Unlike something like not Friday the 13th, that's what I'm talking about right now. Nightmare on Elm Street, or the Halloween series, or Scream, which is probably the most consistently good series of horror films that are like slasher based. Friday the 13th has been mostly bad or terrible movies in my opinion. As for other Friday the 13th fans, I understand that some enjoy these movies more than me, and they get a kick out of it seeing a bunch of horny teenagers get sliced and diced by Jason. It's their thing, but it never really got to me. So when I watched this movie for the first time, I was very disinterested in it, didn't care about the story or the characters, and I just did not care for it at all. I bought the Blu-ray to try and get into it. Never got around to it, never cared that much about it, so I just sold it back. And rewatching it for Friday the 13th, because today's Friday the 13th and I want to give you something that you probably enjoyed, I think that this first movie is fine. I think it is a fine movie. And honestly, not much has changed from my original opinion, though I do think I lean towards more the positive side. And I think that's mostly due to the fact that there's a mystery behind the film and how you don't really know who the killer is. Unlike some other slashers, this is more of a whodunit type of film. We don't know who's killing all these teenagers. The killer is mostly, until near the end of the film, the point of view we see of him or her, and we just see the teenager's scared reactions. And I think that's an interesting approach to a horror slasher for the time. And it makes it stand out a little bit from all the other slasher movies that are coming out, like Nightmare on Elm Street or the Halloween series. Also, looking back on the film again and rewatching it for this review, the 80s setting and look to the movie, how the characters are dressed, the way the sets are designed, I think it grown on me a little bit. In terms of the way it's visualized, it kind of got to me a little bit more. I warmed up to it a bit due to the visuals and the way it looks. I know, it's just a warm feeling that I get. Just something about the way 80s horror and a lot of 80s movies in general look that just bring a nostalgic feeling to my heart. Even though I never grew up with the 80s or any of those movies, throughout its time, I watched a lot of the movies when I was young, but I never grew up during the 80s. I still felt a bit of nostalgia with this film, mostly due to the way the sets are designed, the way the characters look, and just little visual stuff like that. Also, some of the performances are alright, but Betsy Palmer, who plays Mrs. Voorhees in the film, who's revealed to be the killer, is really good. She is by far the best performance in the actual film. She is scary, she is intimidating, she has the crazy eyes down, and my gosh, she is brutal with her kills. And this movie is one of the first movies that starred a lot more gore and blood throughout a lot of horror films after popping off the success of Halloween. This is more leaning towards the goriness and shock factor. And I think for this movie, it's unique and makes it stand out above all else from other slashers. At least for a while, until that within itself got repeated over and over again, even in its own franchise, and it got boring after a bit. But for the first movie, I think it worked fine. Also, the movie's paced very well. Not a moment dragged. The story did not really go too far, but it's not the most interesting story, and I could kind of predict how things are going to play out. But the twist with Miss Voorhees being the actual killer, and us learning about more of Jason's history and his past and what has happened to him, and the history of Camp Crystal Lake, all that stuff is very interesting to learn about and adds a layer of depth to the villain that makes her even more scary and intimidating. And the ending where Jason Voorhees comes back from the lake and drags the girl down is a very shocking jump scare that actually worked very effectively. I just don't like how the movie decided to continue a little further and have another ending. I felt like the way this movie should have ended was just with Jason popping up, dragging the girl, and it cuts to black. And that will set up the sequel even better, as we're now getting Jason as a killer now, apart from it just being a dream. And as for more of my negatives, the reason why I still don't really think this movie is all that great is that not only is the story a bit predictable, like I said, like I can understand that it is just trying to be a simple movie, but I felt like it is too predictable at times. The way the movie has portrayed its characters, apart from Miss Voorhees, is just very forgettable. I didn't care about them, and they were just, to me, meats that are supposed to be stabbed at. Like, I didn't care about their plotline, what they're going for with these characters, or even the main girl. I didn't find her interesting in any way in terms of characterization or performance-wise. She just never really stood out to me. And so sometimes the movie does lose me in that regard. At least the movie's quick and efficient, but it's never a story that really got me hooked. The pacing is well enough for what's supposed to be. The music is creepy. The visuals are nice, but it's more so a me thing and not really a critique on the movie. And the whole twist with Jason's mother being the killer and how that affects the story later on in the last and the last parts of the movie, like, all that is good. Just fine. Like, fine enough. I really don't care much about Friday the 13th as a movie. It did its job efficiently. It told a story. It had a bunch of gory kills. It is just, to me, a fun horror film that came out in the 80s that you could watch from time to time with friends, get a kick out of, but it's never one that I ever want to rewatch over and over and over again. I would probably watch some of the other Jason films that are a lot sillier and don't take themselves too seriously. But that's also another thing I don't like about this film, the tone. I felt like this could have been a little bit more outlandish, but overall, I think this movie is fine. I think it is a fine enough introduction out of all the horror films that started off their franchises. Friday the 13th compared to Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is definitely the weakest of all the first movies of these iconic slasher villains. Despite him having the most amount of movie later on, how it all started was just mediocre for me and just fine. I don't really care much about this film, and I'm going to give Friday the 13th a B-. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you would like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys next time.